Welcome to Worlds Collide. Please comment, like, and subscribe to my channel to be updated on more content.
Chapter 20. The Price of Loyalty. Hamble arrived 2 weeks later, bearing a list of security suggestions and potential recruits he had cultivated over his career. He characterized most of the recruits as rough around the edges, cautioning that while they excelled at their jobs, most had a history of insubordination. Shay and I convened with him the following morning, having scrutinized the list and sent it to Gracia for validation. The files we received back from Gracia were cursory, yet they delineated a clear overall picture of the people Hamble desired. "I am not sure these people are right for this position," Shay asserted as soon as we were seated. "This one has been arrested 6 times since his discharge for assaulting his commander," she illustrated, holding up her digital tablet. "This one lacks both arms," she proclaimed, swiping to the next. "I understand your hesitation, ma'am," Hamble responded calmly. He tapped the file on the screen, and a holographic image materialized in the middle of the table, rotating slowly. "But Sergeant Craig is the best weapons specialist I have ever encountered. He suffers from PTSD as a result of losing his entire team," he elucidated. "The officer he struck was the one who ordered his team into a known compromised operation." I examined the arrest record closely. Most of his arrests stem from drunk driving, aggravated assault, and assault. While I can comprehend his destructive behavior, he possesses the potential to become a liability, I commenced. "I understand," Hamble interrupted, "but he has been clean for 3 years now. His criminal record has remained unblemished ever since." "What if he relapses?" I challenged pointedly. "I am not advocating we deploy him in the field, sir. We require instructors who can train both of our people in modern weapons," Hamble insisted. I flagged his file and replaced it with Chief Markham. "I will have my intelligence guy probe deeper into his file. Chief Petty Officer Markham possesses an interesting file, but he lacks both arms, and the prosthetics currently available cannot compensate for his disability," I observed. "You are correct, sir. I present him for 2 reasons. His obvious record, and I wish to ascertain if you possess the technology to fabricate better prosthetics." He gazed directly at Shay, who remained silent at first but then granted an almost imperceptible nod. I was not certain if Hamble perceived it, but my experience with Krathen body language broadcasted the possibility clearly to me. "He would have to undergo evaluation by our medical staff in orbit," Shay answered slowly. "The other candidates presented fewer problems and gained quick approval pending a more in-depth review of their files. It was agreed that I would accompany Hamble to every initial meeting. There were 2 pilots and explosive disposal specialists, 2 snipers, 4 information security specialists, a medic, and 6 small arms experts in total. Most were self-explanatory, but the pilots proved a little more difficult to sell. In the end, Hamble convinced them on the point that human aircraft were the logical choice for travel on the planet. We stood outside one of the helicopter hangars at the Alpine Airport, waiting patiently for our 2 pilots to arrive by charter. Warrant 3 Tom Marshall and Major Lewis descended from the charter jet I had used earlier, once it came to rest on the tarmac next to the private hangar Hamble had leased. Marshall appeared an unremarkable man with graying hair and a medium build. Major Lewis, on the other hand, regarded us both with suspicion as he approached. His light ebony skin, military-styled haircut, and neatly trimmed beard truly distinguished him. "Welcome, gentlemen," Hamble greeted once they halted before us. "I am Security Chief Hamble. This is Mr. Mitchell." He gestured to me, and I nodded in response. Lewis first shattered his stoic demeanor, chuckled, and saluted Hamble. "It's been a long time, boss." Marshall joined in the light-hearted reunion and gripped Hamble's hand eagerly. "You mentioned you had some work for us that you believed would be challenging?" Marshall remained the only one of the 2 who still worked in the aviation industry as an aircraft engineer for a private aircraft design company specializing in electric helicopter design. "Oh, I believe you would not want to miss this opportunity for the world," Hamble joked cryptically. The 4 of us gathered around a folding card table inside the hangar door, while Hamble conducted the interview process. I mostly remained silent, except to verify information and occasionally address a question here and there, which I mostly sidestepped for the moment. Hamble rationalized my responses each time I received a skeptical look or one of them attempted to press for more information. When the questions were momentarily satisfied, he pulled aside a rolling partition to reveal a Blackhawk that suspiciously resembled a currently active helicopter. Now that the interview is over, it is time for you guys to demonstrate your skills to Mr. Mitchell. You will be putting this bird through its paces. I glanced at Hamble, questioning. The helicopter was indeed active service. Do I need to inquire? I called in a favor from a private contractor I know, he stated with a smile. It is on loan to him from the Army for training. You owe him 20 grand, by the way. We climbed into the back seats next to the rear bulkhead and donned our headsets. Do the two of you think you can remember how to pilot this thing? He taunted. To me, he added, I hope you don't get airsick. The Blackhawk lifted off the pad once the automated ATC granted us clearance. We cruised casually for half an hour before we commenced a steep climb when Hamble complained about any pilot being able to offer a sightseeing tour. The twin turbine engines roared against the thrum of the blades as they worked to beat the air into submission before we seemed to halt midair, then tilted to the right. The aircraft banked sideways until the nose faced the earth below, and we began to plummet toward the ground. The pilots pulled the nose up within a few hundred feet of the ground and banked to regain altitude. The helicopter tossed the two of us like a drink mixer before stabilizing. No sooner than we were back to cruising altitude did I hear Lewis announce a missile lock in a startled voice. You had better not scratch this helicopter, Major, Hamble cautioned. The helicopter banked suddenly, and I could discern the sound of chaff being deployed from behind. I glanced back in time to witness what appeared like a large firework erupting into brilliant colors of red and white. What the hell, boss? Came Marshall's voice. More alarms began sounding, announcing additional incoming, and we banked sideways before just as quickly diving and banking in the opposite direction. More fireworks burst near us each time we were jolted around inside the troop compartment. My stomach began to churn, as though it was being tied into elaborate bows. It required every bit of will I had not to embarrass myself by allowing my lunch to escape, though I could taste the remnants of spaghetti protesting my efforts to swallow it down. I had been tested during a training mission by Blackhawk pilots before my deployment, and again while spending 2 weeks on an aerial recon force assignment, but it had been nothing compared to the abuse I was enduring now. 10 minutes later, it concluded. We touched down gently back on the helo pad in front of the hangar half an hour later. Nobody spoke until the helicopter was pushed back into the hangar, where 3 men dressed in flight suits waited patiently. Hamble extended to one of them a sealed envelope and clasped his hand. Marshall and Lewis waited outside for us to emerge. Lewis was the first to speak. What the fuck, Hamble? He roared angrily. We needed to determine if the two of you hadn't lost your edge, Hamble stated conversationally. They were only fireworks. I do not anticipate such intensive flying regularly, I interjected. Are you still interested in joining my employ? I presented each of them with a piece of paper with a salary scribbled on it. Hamble had formulated the figure of 100 grand annually for each of them. Lewis grinned and nodded. Marshall, on the other hand, hesitated. I already earn this much, and I do not have to obey orders, Marshall dismissed. True, Hamble countered, but the opportunity this job presents will give you a competitive edge against your competition. I do not understand, Marshall rebuked. My organization specializes in advanced technologies across a broad spectrum of disciplines, I declared. You will have the opportunity to pilot and operate the most advanced craft in existence. I intentionally avoided using the word aircraft, since the ships being constructed would be designed for both air and space. Like what? Lewis inquired. I'm afraid that is classified, Hamble stated simply. All I can reveal to you is that this opportunity represents a one-time offer. We drove out to the same cabin I had first introduced Hamble to free at. John Lewis rode with us while Marshall flew back to Charlotte, where he would board his connecting flight back to California. He had chosen to continue with his current company, forfeiting the potential rewards based on a cryptic promise. I could understand his reluctance and might have acted similarly in his place. He and Hamble parted ways with a handshake, well-wishing, and a promise to maintain contact. I extended him an envelope with money for his time and discretion. This time, rather than the old drop ship, Frey awaited inside the new shuttle, clad in the specially designed flight suit and black helmet that concealed her face. Lewis was offered the co-pilot seat next to her, and instructed not to touch anything, to which he happily complied. Hamble occupied the back while I took the empty loadmaster seat behind them. "Full acceleration, if you would, Frey," I directed for Lewis's benefit. Frey elevated the ship into the air at an ominously slow pace, turned, and slammed the control forward fully. Only the inertial stabilizers prevented us from splattering against the rear bulkhead like bugs on a windshield. What we did experience was the acceleration one might expect from a tuned drag car launching. Outside the view screen, the landscape blurred around us, transforming into a featureless wasteland of streaking colors. The air clapped violently enough to cause the ground to quake like a mini earthquake that could be felt for almost 10 miles away. "Would you like to witness something cool?" I asked Lewis once I could breathe normally. "This is awesome," Lewis responded. I tapped Frey on the shoulder. "Let's demonstrate to him what he has to look forward to." Frey nodded, and the shuttle launched into the sky like a rocket soaring for the stars. Less than 5 minutes later, we reached them. There was a brief instant of weightlessness before the gravity plating activated. "Look, Hamble," I called back to the cargo bay. He joined a second later and froze, his mouth agape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Both men were so stunned that neither noticed Frey had opened the visor of her helmet. I tapped Hamble on his shoulder and motioned for him to return to his seat. "Okay, Frey, I believe it is time to return." "Yes, Miktar," she acknowledged with a purr. We landed 18 minutes later at one of the private landing pads behind the command center. Lewis had been so engrossed in the experience that he had just turned to utter something when he noticed Frey removing her helmet beside him. What escaped his mouth was the most unmanly scream I had ever heard as he struggled frantically against his harness. His efforts were so uncoordinated that he literally spilled out onto the deck to everyone's amusement. Even Frey's ears flattened in an attempt to muffle the sound, in contrast to her grumbling laugh. Lewis began to mumble incoherently as he tried to right himself. Hamble leaned on the back of my chair, observing his friend through tears of laughter. "What's wrong, Major? Cat got your tongue?" Lewis calmed only slightly as he gazed from us to Frey and back. "What the hell is that?" he gasped. "That is a Krathen," I answered calmly. "Her name is Frey, and she is the head of my personal security." Hamble escorted Lewis, who kept glancing back at Frey, to the barracks section of the estate. We could both hear him rambling questions off at Hamble as he was escorted away. The Krathen security force, on loan from the military, arrived in March just as the air began to warm. Cool nights remained, but the last of the frost had passed. They hitchhiked on the Odin's Messenger that settled into the newly constructed ship hangar that opened like a giant whale inhaling krill. Shay and I stood on the porch of our cabin, watching it descend within the bowels of the earth until the last of the upper communication suite vanished from view within a cloud of dust and debris. "Things are progressing well," Shay commented around a sip of her coffee. "Hoshka has received word that the space station is fully operational and is currently commencing work on the small shipyard." "That implies we are behind schedule," I responded pessimistically as I watched the hangar doors close. My wristcom chirped once. I glanced down inside heavily. Hamble stated there are Krathen military officials demanding our presence. I tapped a quick acknowledgement and commenced across the field to the command compound. Before I took 2 steps, Shay grasped my shoulder. "Let them wait," she ordered. I turned to glance at her. She was typing on her wrist computer. When she finished, she looked up and smiled with her ears. I instructed Hamble to escort them to the military command wing and provide food. "Shouldn't we confer with them?" I asked, concerned. Shay took another sip of her coffee, looked at me and winked. "I am the Miktar," she explained as if it were obvious. I shook my head. "You have been on Earth too long," I remarked. Shay had started acquiring human habits since we returned. Subtle personality changes began to manifest. One such was the expressions like winking. It had been the one she learned from our daughter, who spent more time with the growing human population than was probably healthy for someone her age. The one thing Shay and I agreed on was the necessity of shielding Kiari from social media broadcasts. "I don't believe so. Earth offers some amazing things." She grinned and gestured toward me with her mug. "I am one of a kind," I chortled. "Oh, I referred to the coffee." Her expression was playful. She turned to walk back into our home, leaving me in mock indignation. I caught up with her after 3 long strides. You know, you are insufferable at times. But we are one, so you will just have to endure, she teased. I intertwined my fingers with hers as we strolled down the corridor toward the central command facility. For you, anything. We joined the newly arrived personnel a short time later. Hamble and Frey met us at the door with somber expressions. Inside, we were greeted by Second Fleet Admiral Trinhez, Merche, Kess, Gratrier, and Shermar Ruel. Shay froze, her tail fluffed out like a Cheeto, and her ears flattened. "Why is my mother here?" she snarled in disapproval. Shermar stepped forward with her ears flattened, but out to the side in wary distress. "I came to see my daughter and granddaughter," she answered sweetly. Shay stood to her full height, baring her teeth. "You are not welcome in my home. You and father disavowed me and mine." She turned and strode out of the room with an air of dismissal. She paused between Hamble and Frey. "Prepare a shuttle. Shermer is to be off the premises within the hour." Frey nodded solemnly. "Shazy!" Trinhez snapped. Shay ignored him and rounded the corner. Hamble stepped into the doorway to obstruct his path when he tried to pursue. "I apologize, Trinhez," I commenced. The yellow security light flickered on my communication device. Additional security would arrive shortly. "She will meet with you once her mother is on her way back to the orbiting ship." To Shermar, I added, "My apologies, Lady Ruel. This is a matter for your mate to resolve." "I have every right to see my daughter and granddaughter," she hissed at me. I shook my head with pity. My mate was disavowed by Trask. You hold no right as she is no longer your daughter, and by extension, you have no granddaughter. 4 humans and 1 Krathen security officer arrived and stood by the door with their hands resting on their sidearms. "Our meeting will resume once it is confirmed Shermer is off the planet." I caught up with Shay, leaning with her back against the wall, a couple 100 feet away around a blind corner. Her tail flicked in agitation, while her hands clenched and released rhythmically, and she growled deeply. "She understands better than to come here," she hissed at me. "I forbade it when Grakesh requested she and I meet 3 months ago." I stepped closer to her and took her hands while I rested my forehead against hers. I did not utter anything. I knew better in the moment. Time for discussion could come later when we had more privacy. I nuzzled her face gently and then urged her forward toward our home. Her personal communication unit beeped persistently until I reached over to silence it. Frey and Hamble could manage whatever pressing matters called for her attention. We both knew what those requests pertained to. I left Shay seated in our quarters with Chiari an hour later to meet with Trinhez and the other delegates. He occupied one of the diplomatic offices along with the others who had accompanied him before. "Where is Shazy?" he demanded the instant I entered the room. "Shay is busy," I answered, calmer than I felt. "What can I do for you, sir?" "I have business with Shazy," he demanded. I took a seat at the opposite side of the table and extended my arm suggestively. "You have me. Miktar Shay and I are one in all matters." I intentionally employed her title as the head of our house and head of our organization. "Again, what can I do for you?" Trinhez scrutinized me for several long minutes of silence before speaking. "The military requires additional ships," he stated frankly. "Now that mining operations have commenced in Sol space, we necessitate additional ships." "I understand," I remarked contemplatively. "What of our prior agreement?" "The Council commands all resources be directed toward the military objective," Gratrier remarked. I looked at him in mock concern. "The Council has the full support of the Mashar shipyard as agreed upon." "The Council has ordered the Sol 1 shipyard commence construction on fleet ships," Hoshka explained. I gazed at Trinhez and Gratrier levelly. "The Council may utilize the remaining resources from Fekati, but the resources in this system belong to us. Sol 1 was never agreed upon to be part of the Krathen Council control. Shay is a Krathen and thus answerable to the Council," Gratrier explained. "The Council possesses every right to demand her obedience." I contemplated furiously how to respond, and then an idea struck me. Trask disavowed his daughter. By doing so, she is solely claimed by her mate, me. I allowed my words to linger in the air. By Krathen culture, a mated female was the property of the male. The Council made it clear that I or my offspring were not welcome to Tathar. By doing so, They have disavowed my citizenship. I am, however, still a citizen of Earth. Everyone in the room gazed at me in disbelief. Trin Hess was the first to recover. "Are you sure this is the route you wish to pursue?" he asked carefully. "If you follow this course of action, the Council could recall all Krathen personnel and seize all assets in Krathen territory." I weighed the consequences carefully. I am confident in my decision, but I will defer the final decision to Miktar Shea. In my culture, our mate may determine their own fate. "Wise choice," Gritrier concluded. "My choice stems from honor." "Not wisdom," I rebuked. "Shreen Skask Mishow," I quoted. I rose, then departed the room. I could hear the room erupt into urgent discussion as I strode away to consult Shea. The implications of forfeiting Krathen resources and technology would impede us for years at best, decades at worst. Shea sat, observing the monitor feed into the diplomatic meeting room. I stepped up behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. She leaned her face against the back of my hand, where it rested. "If we do not submit to the Council's demands, we will have to accelerate our contact with your government," she mumbled. "What technology do we possess to offer humanity in exchange for cooperation?" I asked thoughtfully. "Something without obvious military implications?" "We could begin with medical technology," she suggested. I considered it for a minute and then shook my head. "It would be a start, but we truly require a Krathen medical team of our own." "What about inertial stabilizers?" "Would they not have military applications?" Shea asked, looking up with concern in her eyes. "They would," I conceded. "We would need to extend it to every stable government to prevent one from gaining an unnatural edge over another." An idea struck me. Could we offer the original shuttle I returned on? It does not present a lot of the advanced systems the new craft possess. "If we strip the weapon systems and erase the computer memory," she paused, thinking, "it would be something we could control or counter if they decided to reverse engineer it." While a plan crystallized, the recall of Krathen's support concerned me. Without their support, mining operations, along with production, would cease to exist. We would depend on the benevolence of humanity as a whole. There would be little we could do to counter any concentrated hostility should we lose the narrative. "Do you believe any Krathen would choose to join us?" I asked hopefully. "Perhaps a few," she considered thoughtfully. "I could confer with Mersch about recruitment among my own species. There are always those more interested in adventure, science, and exploration beyond our known universe." "That is a good idea, but we require a plan in the meantime," I pressed. "What about developing a secret production facility and allowing the Council to believe we are cooperating?" I suggested. "We would need Hoshka's help," she mused. Friday, Hoshka, Mershi, Hamble, and Kess convened around the meeting table with Shea and I 2 hours later. The location was chosen due to the absence of any communication devices. Of all those gathered, Kess and Hoshka remained the volatile unknowns. Hushka, while the head of the ongoing mining operations, was also a Krathen citizen who could easily be recalled. Kess, on the other hand, reported directly to the military. Her involvement represented the riskiest decision to include in the meeting. "Each of you have been summoned because we have reached a critical juncture," Shea began. "Everyone is aware of the Council's demands and where my mate stands on them." All those gathered nodded. "We have become family in our time together. Each of you have been with us long enough to gauge our intentions and motivations." "Are you asking us what we believe you should choose?" Kess interjected. "I have always been honest with all of you," I intoned. "I have come to trust each of you in return, without reservation." I allowed my words to resonate. "I wish to persist on our current path, but we cannot do so as long as the Council obstructs our every step forward." Kess nodded solemnly. "The Council believes technological advancement and numbers will secure victory in the war with the Stalath," she explained. "Even with the aid of the Farsi, we have steadily lost territory. The military establishment will continue to support the Council directive in the hopes of a breakthrough, but even they are weary from constant conflict." "Would the military leadership endorse us?" I asked hopefully. Kess's ears flattened as she shook her head. "They will not." "Are there individuals who would support our plan?" Shea asked bluntly. Kess pondered it for a moment before answering. "There are always those who are either disenfranchised with the conflict or are desperate enough to attempt anything new. Would you be one such individual? I inquired carefully. If we choose to break from the council, would you be willing to join us? Kess stared at me, her expression neutral for an uncomfortably long time. Frey shattered the silence. I will remain, she declared. Mercy remained silent but nodded in agreement. Kess observed each of them wordlessly. And what of you? Shay asked of Hoshka. Hoshka sighed heavily. I had hoped to retire in a couple more years. I guess there is no better time than the present. I will assist, she answered finally. I may know a ship captain that might endorse your stance, Kess stated thoughtfully. She tapped the communication tablet on her wrist, and the door chimed. Shay and I exchanged worried glances as I gestured for Hamble to answer it. He opened the door and stepped back hesitantly. Trin Hess, followed by Mashri, entered through the door. Shay turned her eyes to Kess and began to growl dangerously. Kess remained calm despite the growing threat beside her. We anticipated you might consider this course of action, she commented casually. Before you act too hastily, Mr. Shay, Trinus cautioned, you might wish to heed what I have to say. Shay eyed the fleet commander menacingly. I could perceive her muscles tense beside me. I laid a cautious hand on her thigh and squeezed. She was not the only one preparing for a confrontation. Frey wrapped her claws around the hilt of her pistol but did not draw it. Hamble's hand also rested on his pistol, awaiting his cue to act. Neither Krathan officers were armed as far as I could discern, nor were there any security with them that I could hear in the hall beyond. Shay gestured stiffly to the empty seat previously occupied by Hamble, and Trin Hess took it. Wise decision, Miktar Shay, he almost purred. I was never here, he stated evenly. The Predator's Hope has sustained extensive damage and will undergo repairs at the Saul shipyard. He matched Shay's cold eyes with an intensity to match. Do you understand, Miktar? Shay flicked her ear almost imperceptibly in response. Good. I will leave you to discuss resource needs with Mashri. He stood and departed without another word. Mashri assumed his place at the table once the door closed. How might my crew assist you while we undergo repairs? He asked seriously.
I hope you have enjoyed the story so far. Please like and subscribe.